Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Raiden 4 Mikado Remix. Another awesome release for Raiden 4, this time on the Switch. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Moss, Raiden 4 originally released to arcades in 2007. The following year, it would see a release to the 360 that added in some additional stages, as well as some extra ships that were DLC at the time. And then, in 2014, we got the Overkill version of Raiden 4, which was on the PlayStation 3. It added in an additional game mode, as well as a couple new stages to the game as well. Now, fast forward to 2021, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Ryden franchise, and with that we have the release of Raiden 4 Mikado Remix. So this is basically the Overkill release of Raiden 4, but it adds in a new soundtrack remix produced by Game Center Mikado. And between the original soundtrack and this remix version, I really like the remix version, so that extra content is well worth it. In addition to that, having this title available on the Switch in a portable version and also being able to play it in Tate mode is a definite plus. So with that said, let's have a look at the game and you can kind of decide if this is the type of title you're interested in or not. So here we find ourselves at the main menu. There are quite a few game modes that you can play the game, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about this release. And really quick, before I get in there, I just want to touch on one thing. So this game does have a physical version available, and it's the same price as the digital, so if you can obtain it, and it's not that hard to find, I would recommend picking up the physical version of Raiden 4 Mikado Remix. So there are really two main game modes you can play the game in. There's the arcade mode and the Overkill mode. The big difference between the two is the scoring system, and that's one of the things that makes this title a lot of fun. In addition to that, you've got the additional mode which uses the arcade scoring, but adds in the additional stages. Basically, that will be your 360 version. Score Attack, the base arcade game, and then once you've played through the game and fought all the bosses, you unlock Boss Rush. There's also rankings as well as replay and gallery. The ranking is interesting. You actually are playing specifically under a set of rules when you play ranking, so that's pretty neat. So we're going to show the game off today in Overkill mode, and when you enter a mode, it brings you to this screen here. So this menu I'm not necessarily a fan of, as I feel like Moss's UIs have always been a little bit confusing. They got better with Ryden 5, but with this title and with Caladrius Blaze as an example, it was just kind of, to me at least, it was confusing. But we have your playstyle, which is basically the number of players we're playing with. So you've got solo, P1, solo, P2, so you're just playing single player as either the red or the blue ship. Duel, which is actually your two-player mode. And then double, which is a mind-bending mode where you're using one controller to control both ships. Then you can select your stage, and you have your difficulty going from practice all the way on up to ultimate. Today we'll be playing the game on very easy. In addition to that, we have the character select, and here you can select which ship you want to use. There are 3 ships available: the original one for Raiden 4, the Fighting Thunder ME2, the Raiden Mark II, and the Ferry, which were both originally DLCs for the 360 version, then included in the Overkill version on the PlayStation 3, and also included in this version. As I mentioned earlier, this is basically just Overkill, but with a new soundtrack added in and available for the Switch. I forgot to select which character. So for today, we're going to be showing the game off as two-player mode, and just to kind of give you the biggest variety of gameplay, I'm going to be playing as the Fairy, and my partner will be playing as the Fighting Thunder ME2. So once you have all your options set, you will press start, and since this is a Switch title, one thing that does happen is it brings up this screen confirming your controllers. Depending on which controllers you have set up, there can be some Switch funkiness getting all the two-player stuff set up, but from this screen we should be good. So for the fairy, there's no choice, but for the other fighters, there's a choice between a plasma laser and the proton laser. And the difference with those two is the plasma laser will lock on. It's been described as like the homing like toothpaste of doom, and the proton laser, laser which mows off enemies. Some bad English there. Should have been like mows down enemies, but you can basically use that laser to kind of sweep the screen, and it's a pretty neat effect. So I love games where you launch off of ships, but as I'm playing the fairy, I didn't get to launch off the ship. And the fairy is actually an obtainable item in the game as well, and I'll get to that in just a second. So gameplay-wise, things are relatively like straightforward and simple. So we've got the ability to shoot, and we also have bombs. And those bombs will be different depending on which fighter you pick. So for the Fighting Thunder, it's a big screen clearing bomb which will clear enemy shots as well as deal damage. For the fairy, it's this like wave of fairies which kind of does the same thing but doesn't feel like it deals as much damage. And then for the Ryden Mark II, that one will let's see, like have a delay before it actually fires. But you'll see like a bomb kind of like fall out of the ship, and then it deals quite a bit of damage to the enemies when it hits. So there are 3 weapons we can potentially pick up throughout the course of the gameplay. There's the Vulcan, which depending on which ship just acts as like your standard like spread. There's the laser, which I really like on the ferry because you have these like 2 options, or like well, not just 2, depending, it really depends on the level, but you've got these additional like options that kind of like trail after you and fire like lasers, giving you a better spread with the laser than you would get with the other ships. And then there's the one that's the most different between the modes you pick, the plasma laser or proton laser depending, or in the case of the fairy, the bubbles, which is just a lot of fun really. So our first boss here is relatively straightforward to take down, but one thing I want you to note is that there was an octahedron, kind of a reddish octahedron in the middle there. You kind of see that throughout the course of the stage. The stage is like repeated multiple times. So when you are playing in duel mode, there is a win-loss, so like even though it's co-op, there's still kind of a competitive level to the multiplayer, where you've got one player, well, whoever is the player that has the highest score like wins. And then now that we've gotten to the point of talking about score, let's talk about what makes Overkill Overkill. So when we defeat these large enemies, there's a meter that appears above the wreckage of the ship, and that meter will fill up as we dump more and more shots into it. Starting at level 1, which gives you 10,000 points, all the way up to level 5, which will net you an awesome whopping like 100,000 points. It's a really fun way to like work on increasing your score, although it's kind of like high risk, high reward. You have to basically like dive in there and like get in the middle of like things to really get a good overkill on a ship. It's actually really hard to build up that meter, especially when we have like weaker weapons. So there are, as I mentioned, like I am playing a fairy, but there's also like a fairy item that you can occasionally pick up throughout the course of the gameplay. And what that fairy item does, that fairy item will give you like an additional set of power-ups when you like if you die and when you like revive. The fairy will come out of your ship and give you some extra power-ups. It's a really nice little system to just kind of like accelerate you back to where you are. And one thing that's really neat about this game, but can also be a little bit of a problem, is it takes a long time to power up. The weapons go up to, I believe, like level 6, so you have to collect a lot of power-ups to get to full power. Though that itself is pretty satisfying. When you're to that point, you feel pretty powerful. There are 3 missiles you can pick up as well. So those missiles are, in order of which they appear, M, which is your base missile, and it's described as a nuclear missile. H, which is homing, and then R, which is radar. And like radar kind of acts as homing, but just for enemies directly in front of your ship. It's a little bit interesting that way. So here we find ourselves at the boss of the second stage. This one's kind of neat because it's multi-segmented. So you've got all these parts that are coming off of that main fighter, and we have to destroy them all in order to win this particular boss fight. Just using some bombs to get things progressed a little bit quicker. So one thing that's nice about both the Fighting Thunder and the Fairy is the boss those bombs do clear the entire screen of bullets and are relatively fast firing. That's not the case with the Mark II, just something to keep in mind. So, we've talked about the Overkill score system. There's a little bit more I still need to talk about in Overkill about scoring, but in the arcade mode, what's different scoring-wise is you don't have that overkill meter on enemies when you defeat them. Instead, you're looking to defeat the enemies as quickly as possible. If you defeat an enemy fast enough after it appears on screen, you'll be able to get a ×5 multiplier for that enemy. However, if it persists on screen longer, that multiplier will drop down all the way just to its normal score of 1. So it's a pretty neat system, and I feel like you can kind of use both the Overkill system or that I believe it's called the Flash system to really get some awesome scores going. And that's one of the things that makes this title so good, is it just has that really fun arcadey score attack feel to it. In addition to that, the game itself can get difficult, but I still feel that it's reasonably fair. So there you have it. This is Ryden 4 served up for your enjoyment. As far as the minus flavors are concerned, so this is less of an issue with the Fairy, as it does have slightly faster movement, but both of the fighters feel painfully slow, and I would have really loved the ability to increase the speed either through a power-up or in a system like the Thunder Force games or the R-Type games, where you just press a button and you can change your speed up or down. I really appreciate that kind of flexibility, and especially after as much R-Type Finals, or R-Type Final 2 rather, that I've played, I've been missing having variable speed. The other thing is just not being a fan of the UI for this title. And that just kind of extends to other Moss games, and it's just a minor quibble that's my own, I realize. Then as far as the plus flavors are concerned, I really like the special feature of this particular new title, the Mikado remix. Compared to the original soundtrack, I think it brings a lot to this release. And then there's just that fun arcade feel that this title has. It's just one that's just enjoyable to throw in, sit down, and just play through. It'd be nice if it had some options with a little bit more ships, Caligula's Blaze had. Well, not necessarily ships, but kind of. Or weapon options like you have in Ryden 5. But this one's still an excellent shoot 'em up, and it's one that I highly recommend you pick up, especially physically for the Nintendo Switch. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, thank you so much for joining us this week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.